Hi guys, we are live. Sorry if I'm a minute late, but do you ever have one of those nights where your kids just do not want to go to bed? That was my night tonight, and my goal always with these 8 o'clock lives are to get the kids in bed so that I can sit here and focus on you guys. And they just I think it's winter. They just have ants in their pants today. It just has been completely crazy. So we're going to wait just a second until some people pop on here so I'm not talking to myself all night. So hey, we have friends on. I'm so excited. We'll wait just another minute for everybody to pop on here. Oops. I'm trying to share it over here on, oh my goodness. Not what I want to do. Give me 1 second. Okay, so apparently the internet doesn't want to cooperate tonight either, so. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's get in here and start talking about IEP goals. That is distracting. My face is popping up in the laptop below me. I'm going to constantly be looking at it. So, okay, so IEP goals. We are talking about today how you can be a goal digger. See what I did there? I thought that was kind of funny. So, we are talking about IEP goals. I feel like a lot of times as parents, we go into this IEP meeting and we have our parent input statement and we're talking about how our kids learn best and what things are hard for them and what things help them when they're upset, what their motivators are. We have this whole list of accommodations and modifications and services that we know our child needs, right? But then we get to the goals portion and you're like, oh, that's really a lot and I don't know what I'm doing. And it sounds good, so everything else is falling in line. The goals are probably okay too. And don't feel bad if that's you, because that has totally been me. And sometimes I still look at IEP goals and I'm like, okay, I feel like something is off there, but I'm not really sure where it is. So I have to take a step back and go through all my notes and make sure we are hitting all the important points that need to be covered in an IEP goal. So today we're talking about SMART IEP goals, but we're going to talk specifics about 2 different goals that are very, very different and are written very differently so that you guys can see some specific examples of how those SMART goals kind of work in an IEP goal. Now, an IEP goals must include functional and academic annual goals per IDEA law. So they serve 2 purposes: to enable students to access and make progress in the general education curriculum and to address students' other educational needs. This is where we're talking about those functional skills. So functional skills would be like things that set us up. You ready? I'm going to get really serious with you guys. So IDEA law specifically says IEPs, special education, should be setting our children up for further education, independent living, and employment. So if your child's IEP goals are not setting them up for further education, independent living, and employment, what are we doing? What is the point of the goal if that isn't what the target is? If this isn't a skill that they need to gain employment, to live independently, or to further educate themselves in school, we need to reevaluate those goals and decide how appropriate they are for your child. Now, this is where your job as a parent is super important because you know them best. So you know what your goals are for your child. So I use the example, and I got it from a friend, so I'm stealing this example, but it's a good one. of counting coins. How often in your daily life are you counting coins anymore? Like when I go to the store, I use my debit card or credit card for everything. I don't really count coins very often. And most of the time when I'm adding in the grocery store to make sure I'm under budget, I'm just rounding, right? So when you have a goal and the curriculum kind of says, well, they have to learn how to count coins, I want you guys to ask yourself, and not just counting coins, but any goal. When you look at the goal, decide how often you use that in your everyday life. Is this something that you've used in the last month, in the last 2 months, in the last 6 months? And if it isn't something that is applicable to your everyday life right now, what are we doing with that IEP goal? Why is that a goal for your child if it's not something that you use in your everyday life? Again, we need to address those functional skills and academic skills, but they have to be relevant to what's happening in today's world. Also, maybe your child doesn't have the capability to ever count coins. Like maybe they're never going to be a cashier. Maybe they're not, and maybe they're always going to have to use their debit card for things and they're going to have to round. That's okay. But we shouldn't have it in a goal for them if it's not something that is attainable for them within the next year. Again, the goals are something that has to happen within 12 months. That's the ideal range that we want them to achieve these goals. And if it's not something that we think they can achieve within 12 months, we need to reevaluate that goal and decide how we can make it more attainable for them because we want them to win, right? They may not know that they have these IEP goals, but it's important for them to have some wins because once we have this small thing that they've successfully won, this goal that they have reached, we can take that goal and we can build a step to the next goal. And then that big goal of becoming, a rocket scientist or whatever your goal is for your kid is going to be a little bit more attainable because we're taking their strength that they have, the skill that they've mastered, and we're building off of it. And we're making steps to that big end goal. So that is a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. But I want you guys to go and grab your IEPs right now and look at your first, second, third goals. Look at your goals and tell me, do they set you up for further education, independent living, or employment? Just let me know in the comments below. I'm going to keep talking about goals. We're going to talk about how goals are lined up, what SMART goals are. But I want you guys to leave me a note, go look at your IEPs, and tell me if those goals are setting them up for those things. And if you're not sure, that's okay. Leave me a note below and we'll talk about it. So IEP goals, we talked a little bit about SMART goals. If anybody has ever heard of a SMART goal, this is not just an education thing. This is an all kind of goals thing. But SMART goals are very specific and they want the goals to be written. It says that goals should be written in a way that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So while you're looking at your goals and we're talking about if they're setting you up for further education, independent living, and employment, I want you to keep that in mind. Is this goal specific? Is it measurable? Is it attainable? Is it relevant? And is it timely? All of those things are important in those goals. And if they are missing any of those pieces, it's really hard for us to gauge if they've actually achieved this goal, if they've actually attained this goal. So when you're looking through your goals, I want you guys to pay attention. Every district kind of does this differently, and your goals are going to look really different just based on who wrote them and what district it is. But generally the way that goals are written is there should be a state standard that it is tied into that goal. And then you have your annual goal, and then below that you have benchmarks. Now sometimes you might just see one benchmark, sometimes you might see 3 benchmarks. There really isn't like a right or wrong reason for that, but benchmarks are awesome because they help you build. We're talking about that stair steps, right? All the way up to that big goal. That big goal is that annual goal in this case, and those benchmarks should be measured in a timely manner that build off of each other. So if you start out your goal and you say something like, your child has to do XYZ given 3 prompts 80% of the time by this date, then maybe your benchmarks are like given 5 prompts and 60% of the time by an earlier time frame, that sort of thing. We're going to specifically talk about that when we talk about our examples. So, oh, I'm knocking everything down over here. Sorry, I still have like a scratchy throat. Okay, so we're going to talk specifically, one of the things that I don't talk a lot about, but I feel like is been coming up more often is speech goals. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is a specific speech goal that is out of one of the goals from one of the families that I work with, and I thought it was really well written, and so I wanted to share it with you guys. I changed the name for confidentiality purposes and used my guy Mason as my example. So it says Mason will repeat repetitive phrases from his choice of book with 80% accuracy for his adjusted developmental age, given one prompt by November 2020. So when we look at that and we break it all apart and really look at that, we want to make sure that we are talking about that SMART goal, making sure we're reaching all of those things. Specific would be that repetitive phrases. That is something that is really common when you're working with kids who are struggling with some sort of speech goal, that repetitive phrases and getting them to actually use their words and anticipate that kind of conversational piece, also super important. Also, the adjusted developmental age, also really important, because we're not talking about, when we say just for his age, are we talking about grade? Are we talking about his ability right now? Are we talking about the developmental age that he should be at, or what is appropriate for him? So again, we're talking about what is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Making it his developmental age makes it more attainable for him, maybe rather than the grade level, because maybe he's not speaking at a grade level right now. So we're talking about his adjusted developmental age. Like, what does the data say that what point is he at right then? Or 80% accuracy, that is super measurable. One prompt, very measurable, so we know what kind of our goal is and how we're measuring that. Timely, November 2020, that would be 1 year from the IEP as we're writing it right now. So again, it has to be timely. Sometimes I see like IEP goals that are written and the benchmarks will say quarterly, or by this spring, or by fall of 2020. That isn't measurable. That is very subjective data. So fall to one person could be August, or it could be November. So we want them to be very specific on those dates and times. And it doesn't really matter about the benchmarks and when they happen, as long as they're building off of each other. So if we're talking about this goal, Mason will repeat repetitive phrases from his choice of book with 80% accuracy for his adjusted developmental age, given one prompt by November 2020. We are building off of them with benchmarks. So the benchmarks would say, when having a story read out loud to him, so where is this happening? How is it happening? Very specific. Mason will repeat the line in the story using the multisensory methods taught. For example, overemphasize in intonation, barely got that out, timing and tapping to go along with the beat of the words, with 3 prompts by February 2020. So if you remember, our big goal says 1 prompt by November 2020. We want him to be able to do this with 3 prompts by February. So that would be the first step to reaching that next goal. Now, the next benchmark would build off that again. So it would say the same sort of thing. When having a story read out loud to him, Mason will repeat the line in the story using multisensory methods with 2 prompts by May 2020. And then again, we're back to that big goal of 1 prompt by November 2020. We are still using the same thing, repetitive phrases. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about repetitive phrases, I'm talking about those cute books that everybody knows, like chicka chicka boom boom, will there be enough room? That is the repetitive phrase. Henny penny, the sky is falling. 5 little monkeys, no more monkeys jumping on the bed. Good night moon. All of those have those repetitive phrases. So those things that your child can anticipate coming up next in the book. So just so you guys know kind of what I'm talking about there. But we also really want to focus in on what the method of collecting the data is. Now, in this case, observation is probably the best option. But when we're talking about observation, one thing that I like to request is that we have multiple people taking that observation. Observation is, again, very subjective, and we want a really good read on how much progress your child is making towards this goal. So we want to have multiple people looking at this observation. So multiple people reading this book out loud to them and having him repeat those phrases and understanding that what did we say? The overemphasize intonations and the timing and tapping. So they need to know how to do that, how to teach him, how to work with him on that, but they also need to observe with him so that we're getting very great, very good data on where your child's at. So we talked about the quarterly by spring. We want them to specify the time. But overall, that is a really well-written goal. It's very specific. We know what's happening. Attainable and relevant is a little bit more difficult, but this is again where you come in as a parent to decide if you think that this is something that your child can attain within the next year. And again, if it's relevant, is this something that you need to know how to do for further education, independent living, or employment? Now, specifically anticipating and sounding out these repetitive phrases might not be something that you need to know, but it might be a step to a bigger goal, which would be reading the book on his own, right? And being able to sound out those words on his own without the prompts. So again, it doesn't have to be something specific that you're using, but it should look down the line towards further education, independent living, and employment. And I talk to parents all the time who have 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and they're like, employment, independent living, that's so far off. But it's important at any age to decide if this is something that you think is going to build off of, that we can build off of into a bigger goal. So let me go to my next one. I have to write it down because I won't remember anything. Okay, so this is goal 2, and this is back to some of those behavioral issues that we deal with a lot. Kids who struggle with that self-regulation, that impulsivity piece. This is a goal right out of Mason's IEP, actually. Given a situation where Mason is provided constructive feedback, Mason will accept the feedback without an outburst, which would be, and this is actually has the examples in there because outburst, again, is subjective, so we need to be specific on what that looks like. Yelling, crumpling paper, refusing to correct work, all of those would be considered that outburst. So he will accept the feedback without the outburst by correcting the work given 1 or less kind reminders or visual cues by November 2020. So in this specifically, Mason does not like when you tell him that he did not do his work the right way. He does not like it, and he's not alone. That is a super common thing for all kids, which is why I chose this goal. But in that situation, he doesn't know how to manage that emotion that comes with the disappointment that he isn't actually done because he rushed through the work and didn't read the directions fully. He doesn't know how to handle that impulsivity, so he just wants to yell and refuse to do the work because it's hard and crumple up his paper, throw things across the room. All of those things have happened. So, and I'm sure that they've happened for some of your kids too. It's really a common thing. But when we're talking about the goal, it's very specific. When we're giving him specific feedback, specifically, we know what the outburst is. We know what we're expecting him to do. We need him to correct the work and redo maybe, or go back and check Sometimes just checking the work is important. And we want him to do it with one or less kind reminders. And I specifically said in here kind reminders because prompts or cues sounds differently. And in the last goal, that was appropriate. When we're dealing with kids who have this struggle with this social, emotional, behavioral piece, it is super important to keep things really positive. Saying that it's a kind reminder is a very direct direction to keep it kind because it's so easy. It's so easy, right? Like, we're all parents. Like, how easy is it to just react when your kid is acting out? Like, so easy. I struggle with it. I did it tonight. I totally bit my kid's head off. So in the IEP goal, we're going to be very specific and say we want it to be a kind reminder. This is a skill that they don't have yet. We're helping them learn that. That's why it's an annual goal. So let's give them a kind reminder. So again, very specific. Or it can be a visual cue. Sometimes for kids, having that auditory redirection is overwhelming for them or gets them more frustrated. So just having a visual schedule of expectations that the teacher can point to as visual cue, that is very specific. Sometimes that's helpful. We know we need one or less kind reminder, and we know what date it needs to be done by November 2020. And this is a very attainable and very relevant life skill that all of our kids needs, right? Like, they need to be able to accept constructive criticism. Can you imagine them in a place of employment when their boss is like, hey, that's great. I love how you did that, because all bosses talk like that. But can you go back and fix this? And your kid's flipping desk and throwing the computer. This is a life skill that they need to have. So it's very important that we have this in there. So it's a very relevant goal for this child. So the benchmarks would look like: when frustrated by constructive criticism, Mason will use his words, I feel angry, frustrated. I am angry, frustrated. Very specific in there what we want him to say. And we don't have to fill in the frustrated or angry portion. It can just say, I feel, I am. Those very self-aware kind of words, so that we know what we're working on with them without the physical aggression piece. Throwing things, crumpling paper, again, very specific. Given 3 prompts by February 2020. So back to that main goal, we're saying one kind reminder by November. So this is where we're building up to that. We're going to give them the 3 kind reminders by February 2020, and hopefully they can do that. The next benchmark to build off of that would be a similar thing. We'd say given 2 or less kind reminders and correcting his work as requested by May 2020. So again, we're building off that because we want them to succeed, right? And if we're giving them these small skills that they can master, that they're getting ready. So in that benchmark 1, we're focused on him using his words. I feel, I am, being able to explain how he's feeling. And in benchmarks 2, we're taking that skill that he's learned and we're building off of it, and we're adding in that corrected his work piece. So he's able to explain that he's frustrated. It makes me mad when you tell me to redo my work, but I'm still going to do it, right? And so then by goal 2, by the big annual goal, by the time we get to November 2020, he's going to be able to use his words, explain that he's frustrated, not be physically aggressive by throwing his paper, crumpling his paper, or using his words, and he's not going to refuse to do that work. So we are building off of the skills. So this is where you talk about taking a strength and building off of it. Because if he already has this strength, this something that he knows how to do well, he's going to achieve that next step sooner than if we just had this one big annual goal. It's much harder to collect the data on how he is making progress towards this annual goal if these benchmarks don't build off of each other. So I don't know if that makes sense to everybody. So those are my 2 examples for tonight. If you guys have more questions, feel free to leave them below. Like I said, I want you guys to grab your IEPs and leave your questions in the comments below. Let me know what you need answered. If you're not sure if your IEP goals are written the right way, go ahead and click the Book Now button and select a time and let's talk. The consultation is a free consultation, so we're just like talking and figuring out what your IEP looks like. There are definitely a few ways we can work together though. Setting the appointment is one way. I can review your IEP. I attend IEP meetings in person and virtually. So by phone, I did that today when this was supposed to be at 2:00 and I don't know what happened, so it's crazy. But the last thing I want to make sure is that there is so many of you that are new here. Make sure you guys are grabbing a copy of that IEP checklist. If you need it, leave your name in the comments below. Let me know. I will send the email over to you and get you a copy of that IEP checklist. But that checklist is going to allow you to dig really deep into these IEP goals, into your accommodations and modifications, into your services and all of that. So I had a great time talking to you guys. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you guys next month for our next live chat. Make sure you guys check out the events to see what's coming up next, and I'll see you soon.